You're listening to This Motorcycle Life, conversations about why we ride. Episode 18, Built, Not Bought. I'm Bruce Philp, and thank you for listening. Well, in spite of the mission of this show, it turns out that you don't just find philosophers under motorcycle helmets. Sometimes you find them under welding masks, too. And in a few minutes, you're going to meet a craftsman who might just hold the secret to why our motorcycles become such a big part of our lives. But before we get started, let's take care of a couple of important pieces of business. Now, normally, this is the moment in the show when I would give some love to my friends at Eat Sleep Ride. For this episode, though, I want to give this time to something called the Women Riders World Relay. This event actually began in February in northern Scotland, and it will spend the next year or so exploring every corner of the world as its baton is passed from one intrepid woman biker to another. The purpose of this event is loosely described as promoting motorcycling among women and calling the attention of the motorcycle industry to this increasingly important market. When I first heard about it, I thought it sounded amazing, and I wished everyone the best. But I didn't really engage much beyond that. To me, a fellow rider is a fellow rider, no matter who they are or what they're riding. I'm already there. This was a message I thought I didn't need to hear, even if other people apparently did. Then I interviewed Jessica Stone. In our conversation in episode 16, Jess talked about the particular experience a woman sometimes has becoming a motorcyclist, and it seemed to touch a nerve. That episode is on track to be my most listened to ever, and I heard from some of those listeners. And what was clear from their stories was that women often do look at motorcycling differently and experience it differently, and that those voices are worth listening to if we want to keep this sport alive and relevant. You can follow the Women Riders World Relay baton in real time, and I'll include the information you need to do that in my show notes. And as I do every episode, I also want to say thanks to everyone who has written me with their stories or shared a rating or a review on iTunes. I'm sorry if this seems repetitive, but I never want to take that support for granted. This podcast has listeners literally all around the world now, and that couldn't have happened without people like you telling the world that they like what they're hearing. So thank you. Okay, let's go. So around this time of year, I start to get a dangerous itch. I'm not talking about the overwhelming urge to ride that we all get when the snow melts. I'm talking about something more creative, and maybe even riskier. And that's the urge to pick up a tool and change something. It's counterintuitive, but it seems like the more we love a motorcycle, the more we want to make our mark on it. This time of year, builder shows like the One Show and Mama Tried and the OG and the Hand-Built Show are all fresh in our memories, so the temptation is especially strong. And then there are all those Instagram bikes. By about now, my beloved Triumph Scrambler always seems a little nervous if I'm anywhere near a toolbox, and with good reason. I'm a pretty giftless mechanic. Still, I think that bike would be a great canvas for customization. I imagine myself in my barn, showered in sparks, expertly grinding things. There seems to be a lot of grinding involved in this process. And building something that's one of a kind and more perfectly mine, an unfiltered expression of who I am as a rider, the ultimate intimacy with my machine. I think we all chase this ideal of being one with our motorcycles. Imagine if that motorcycle was something you'd built with your own hands. Surely that's another level, leaning your bike into a turn knowing that every nut and bolt under you is there because you put it there. Well, my next guest proves that being a builder isn't always quite so simple, and that there's a lot more to what drives the people who do it than just a passion for riding motorcycles. For him, loving and building bikes were more of a happy coincidence than two sides of a coin. Building is a compulsion all its own, it seems, even if the soul-satisfying experience of working with your hands appears to echo everything we love about riding bikes. Eric Gorges is the founder of Detroit's Voodoo Choppers, and on his journey to becoming a builder of bespoke motorcycles, he was so inspired by the experience of making things that he now also hosts a TV series for American public television called A Craftsman's Legacy. He's just written a book by the same name, which will be released in the next couple of weeks. It's about people who make things, but it's also about Eric's own story, about how making things helps us figure out who we are, and about how being one with a machine can mean so much more than just a great ride. I reached Eric Gorges at Voodoo Choppers in Detroit, Michigan. Hey, Eric, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm pretty well, thanks. I'm just fine. Spring is coming. You must be a pretty busy guy, I imagine.
Oh, yeah. There's all kinds of stuff going on. It's been nuts.
Yeah, you've got a couple of enterprises going, plus this book, which we're going to talk a bit about. So I really appreciate you making the time to talk to me today. I've just read your book, and I feel like I've got a million questions.
Thank you.
Well, the pleasure was mine. I feel like I've got a million questions, about Voodoo Choppers, about what it means to make things, and about your own journey, which I really kind of connected with. So I hope you're feeling chatty today.
Sure, yeah.
Cool. Okay, well,
it's always fun to talk about.
Yeah, well, no doubt. Frankly, I haven't met the motorcyclist that didn't have something to share philosophically, as my listeners well know. So I think we're going to do well today. So why don't we start with that journey, just to kind of, set the table with it. In your book, Craftsman's Legacy, you kind of begin in the middle of your story as a craftsman. And you reveal how you became one a little bit at a time, sort of as the book goes on. But if it's okay with you, and I know you've told this story many times, I'd like to use that turning point as context for what we're going to talk about because it's so powerful. You didn't start out as a craftsman and a television personality, did you? Your life took a turn. So tell me about that.
Yeah, as a boy, I was around it my whole life because my granddad was a cabinet maker, and my father was a pretty accomplished woodworker himself, although he didn't do it professionally. So I grew up with an appreciation for craftsmanship and working with your hands, and honestly, as a kid, we never hired anybody to do anything. It didn't matter what it was. We did it ourselves. Cement work, brick work, framing, windows, whatever. We just did it ourselves. And I think that was sort of a product of just where my parents were financially and my dad's abilities, and my family's abilities. So I learned a lot at that time. But when I got older, college wasn't really my thing. I didn't enjoy school. I didn't enjoy high school, and didn't really have any interest in going to college. But I was pretty keen into computers and networking, and I took a job at Xerox Corporation, like when I was 16 as a stock boy, and I worked for a part of the company that did outsourcing. So it was all basically making copies. And I enjoyed it. I liked what I did, and it was an exciting because they were transitioning from an analog state to a digital state, and I was at the right place at the right time, and I, was pretty computer savvy, and ended up sort of being in the IT field for Xerox, and I enjoyed it. I loved it. But then I started developing an anxiety disorder that became pretty severe and debilitating in my life, and made me reevaluate things. A good friend of mine asked me, if I could do anything for a living, what would I do? And I didn't hesitate. I said, I really like making things. I'd make stuff. I'd work with my hands. And he said, well, maybe that's what you need to be doing. So I took that to heart, and he could have told me to build a rocket ship and fly to the moon. I would have done that. But because I was just looking for a cure, something to make me better.
Yeah.
And that changed my life,
Yeah, clearly. And I'm sure you must know how resonant that story is for people. Finding ourselves on the wrong mountain in life is something I think lots of people fear. I wonder what you want people to get from that part of your story, because you really made it a part of your narrative. I mean, not the lessons of craftsmanship, which we'll get to, but the lessons of making that kind of a life-changing leap. What do you hope people will get from what you went through there?
Hopefully, just maybe some awareness that I think sometimes when you get into a position like that in your life. There's a sense of aloneness or like you're a singularity,
Right.
and, maybe that other people aren't dealing with things like that. So I think it's helpful to realize that, it happens to a lot of people, and, sometimes you just got to make a change in life, like a lot of people, especially older generations, you sort of looked at your career in life as a long-term investment. Like that's what you were going to do for your life. If you're going to be an accountant or you were going to be a musician or, a lawyer or, factory work or whatever you were doing, that's what your career was going to be for life. And changing drastically from one career to another was something that a lot of people don't necessarily think that is in their reach. And I sort of disagree with that.
Yeah, me too. It's funny. You're not the first person that I've met who has said that motorcycles changed their lives, and you're not even actually the first person on this show to say that. It was just about a year ago that I interviewed Freddie Spencer, the Grand Prix legend, and even he kind of said the same thing. I'm thinking about that moment, at Xerox. You could have decided to make patio furniture. And I'm just wondering, what is it about motorcycles that I guess drew you, and what is it about them that was so healing, if I can use that word?
Sure, yeah. Well, those are two different things, like, first of all, motorcycles have always been a fascination of mine. In the book we talk about, three things that I always thought were really cool in life, and it's motorcycles, helicopters, and scuba diving, and I've been fortunate enough to do all of those things. But bikes, even when I was a little kid, man, I always drew choppers and motorcycles, and dirt bikes and stuff like that. And I was never very good at drawing, but that was always like, it had a rebellious nature to it, and this like outlawish, ideas behind it, I guess. So it sort of drew me to that. And then when I was old enough, I got a bike and just loved just the purity of it, like being on a bike and feeling the wind against you and hearing the motor and, being so close to the concrete and so close to other cars and everything else. And you could just, you feel it all, and when you're out in rain, and the rain feels like razors hitting your face. I've never been a guy that rode with a fairing and things like that. So, having the rain come down and smack your face like that, and it hurts,
Yeah.
It's not an enjoyable experience sometimes. And other times it is, riding in the rain. Sometimes it is super enjoyable. But just all those things about it really are, they're liberating,
Yep. It's funny, that word just seems to be the one people reach for. And I feel the same way, obviously. They have this sort of magical power to, my shorthand for it is I feel like I'm 20 again. And the reason is not just about being young, but it's about intensity. But, I sort of get, like most people, I get that just from riding bikes. You wanted to make them. And I don't mean just customize them and bolt stuff on, but you wanted to kind of conjure them up from raw iron, which strikes me as kind of the deep end. What made you want to jump in there besides your, comfort level with sort of working with your hands?
I wanted to be able to make whatever I thought, so if I had an idea or a design, I wanted to be able to make it from scratch. And I didn't want to have to start with somebody else's ideas or designs and alter them. I wanted them to be mine. So that's really what was the driving force behind learning how to shape metal and becoming a metal shaper, was so that I had that ability. When you're building something from scratch, if you start with somebody else's tank and you modify it, I always sort of felt like, you know, you can modify it, but you're still starting at some point. You're starting with somebody else's design, and then you're altering that design. And I just wanted to be able to do it myself.
Yeah, I get that, which, you know, in a funny way that resonates with being a motorcyclist. I mean, obviously you've made a much bigger leap than most riders do, but that need for personal control or kind of autonomy seems like a big theme in this, you know, in this sport, if I can call it that. So that kind of makes sense to me. Well, tell me a bit about Voodoo Choppers. What's your vision for the place? And tell me about the kind of bikes you build and where you fit into that world.
So, you know, Voodoo has really grown over the last 20 years in a lot of different ways. You know, originally when we started the company, it was always about hand-built bikes and hand-built pieces for a motorcycle. And, you know, we used to do maintenance and we used to do other things like that. And over the years, a lot of that's phased out. And now it's really at a point where, you know, I just build what excites me. You know, I'm not in the shop as much as I used to be. That's really changed over the last couple of years, especially with the television show and then and the book and everything. So my time in the shop is really limited in many ways. But it ended up being a good thing because it forced me to be way more selective about what projects I get involved with. And I think it works out for the client too, because, you know, I'm not the great builder for everybody. I know that. You know, I'm a pretty slow builder. I take my time. I don't rush into things, and I've built my whole life that way. Like, you know, I don't like feeling rushed. I don't like being rushed. So I really try to avoid putting myself in positions like that. And that comes through to building a bike. Like, it's the first discussion I have with people is timelines, you know, like, because I've disappointed people. You know, I've taken projects on that have taken significantly longer times than I anticipated, and at the end of the day, it really just disappoints the client. You know, and then I feel bad because the client's disappointed. You know, I didn't start this to make people upset or
right,
you know, not happy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's a really bad feeling. You know, I hate that, but at the same time, I'm not willing to let something go out that I'm not 100% happy with.
Yeah, I mean, that's clear in your work. I haven't seen any of your bikes in the flesh, but lots of pictures, and they all have this kind of all business look, like everything's really well sorted out and they look rideable, and, you know, they've got lots of attitude, but they don't have that cartoony quality that, you know, sometimes comes to mind when you think about the word chopper. Is that you? Is that, am I seeing you in those bikes?
I'd like to think so. You know, like, I spend a lot of time on the overall design of the bike and the way it looks and the way everything flows together. My style is definitely more, you know, influenced by traditional hot rodding and this industrial look and very to the point. You know, I don't do a lot of unnecessary body work or unnecessary things. I wouldn't say that all of my bikes are super comfortable to ride. You know, we've definitely gone through a period of time where, you know, the bikes were challenging to ride. And I think a lot of that is phased out over time as I've developed as a builder, frankly. You know, like I'm, you know, still heavily influenced by form over function, but I'd like to say that I spend a little bit more time thinking about comfort and rideability than I used to. You know, safety and things like that are way more important to me now than they were, you know, 10 years ago as a builder. You know, you build hand shift bikes and bikes with no front brake and that type of stuff. Yeah. So now I spend a lot more time with braking and making sure that, you know, lights are solid and you can see the lights, you know, a lot of things you do as a builder, and then you realize that it's probably not a wise decision.
Right. I don't know. Somehow that doesn't surprise me. I mean, maybe it's because I read your book, but at the end of the day, a motorcycle is still a tool, and the kind of bike I would expect you to build would be one that had utility. So I'm not surprised to hear that. Do you do the engine work as well, or is that do you put crate motors in them?
Most of the time, 98% of the time, it's a crate motor. I've always been driven more by design and fabrication than the mechanics behind building a motor. Like, I've built motors in the past, and I've done motor work, and it's a different type of enjoyment, but it's not something, I've never been the guy that's like wanted to squeeze every, last bit of horsepower out of a motor. You know what I mean? Like, that's just never been my game.
Yeah. Yeah. What kind of person buys your bikes, and how does that process go? Or can you even generalize?
I don't think I could generalize it, because it's all different walks of life, dude. I've done work for professional athletes, and some entertainers, and people that are just regular everyday kind of people, doctors and guys that work on the line for one of the big three, and I mean all walks of life, dude. Professional, blue collar, all kinds of different stuff.
Yeah, that really seems like the way the chopper scene is working these days. I mean, that it has its roots in a world where guys carry lunchboxes to work, but it seems like everybody gets them now, which I hope is benefiting your business. But I'm not surprised to hear that it's that your customers are that diverse. That's pretty cool. You said in your book, actually, that once you build something, it's not yours anymore. You let it go. If you were to build a bike for me, does that mean that I'll never see you in that machine? Is there something of you that stays with it when it heads down the road?
I think that every bike has, if it's a bike that I've built, it definitely has my influence and my style to it. Like, there's no going around that. That's why you hired me in the first place, was because of that style that our bikes represent. And every single bike, no matter if it's like one of the Pro Street styles we did many years ago, or a bobber or a chopper or a high neck chop or a digger or whatever, like every single one of those bikes, still, you could look at the bike and tell that it came out of our shop. You know what I mean? And that I was involved with it. So that stays with the bike. But once I've gone through the building process, the design phase, and all the fab work behind it, it's not mine. You know what I mean? And I don't miss them. Like I want somebody else to enjoy it and love it and appreciate it and beat the hell out of it. Ride it, man.
Yeah. I wonder if that's one of the big differences between a craftsman and an artist, because there are certainly, in the custom scene at large, there are certainly lots of builders out there who are making sculpture, and are attached to it. Your attitude seems more craftsman-like to me than that. It's does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. To me, they've always been machines. It's a two-wheeled machine. It's designed to be ridden and enjoyed. It's not a sculpture or something that is only to be looked at. These are meant to be touched and, sit on them and enjoy them, man, and roll that engine, man. Burnouts and all the fun stuff that goes along with that, And even when we did shows and stuff like that, I think the first time, or the one time that comes clearly to mind with that, was when we were on the Biker Build-Off with Discovery back in 2004, which is seems so long ago. But I remember they had the bikes, at the end of the day on display, and they were all roped off, and there was a huge, area that was roped off, and then they had security and stuff like that, and people could only see the bike from a distance. And then finally, I was like, hey, you want a picture with the bike? Come on in, and security was like, what are you doing? And I said, well, it's my bike. I can do whatever the hell I want. Like, I don't care. And they were like, yeah, whatever. And everybody was cool about it. But, I let kids come in and sit on the bike and climb on the bike, and parents and people and couples. And, it didn't matter. Like, yeah, sit on the bike, take a picture. You're not going to hurt it, yeah, your foot hits it or something like that. Things happen, but it's nothing that can't be fixed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So enjoy the bike, get a feel for it, man. You can't get a feel for it looking at it from a distance and taking a picture for it,
Yeah. Yeah. And, the shows that are so popular now, they really seem to vary in that regard, where there's a lot of stuff behind velvet ropes, but, there's still a grassroots kind of movement of people who build bikes that they want you to touch and experience and maybe ride. And somehow that feels more authentic to me. So let's talk about your book a little bit. And I think we'll end up coming back to motorcycles naturally. And I picked up some sort of themes in A Craftsman's Legacy, which is the title of the book, that seem to come up again and again about the way a craftsman's mind works. And they all felt kind of important, so I wanted to ask you about them, and it's going to be kind of a mixed bag, but, just play with me. And so the first theme that I thought came up a lot was this idea of childhood. You refer to childhood or to being childlike often in how you talk about learning to build things, and even in the act of doing it. I think at one point towards the end of the book, you talk about what you do in your shop as being playing, and that felt significant somehow. What does thinking like a child mean to you as a craftsman?
Well, the great thing about childhood is that we don't have these boundaries put up, right? Like, if you, as a kid, and I use this example anytime I give a talk about craftsmanship or working with your hands, when we were kids and you're 8 years old and in school they have you build a Mother's Day or make a Mother's Day card or a Christmas ornament or whatever it is, there's no boundaries to that. Like you just do what you think is best, and
Right.
and you enjoy that process, right? And you cut out shapes or you use noodles or whatever, or beads or whatever, or glitter, man. And you just go to town on it. And then you have this excitement and this pride behind it, right? Like you're super proud of what you did and you love it. And you're so excited, man. There's no way in hell that you're waiting until Mother's Day to give that to your ma, you're giving it to her, in February when they have you do it or, whatever, they're always like super far advanced in their time frames. But, as an adult, we forget that connection. And I heard very recently Pablo Picasso had this quote, and I just love it. It says, every child's an artist. This isn't a direct quote. I mangled the shit out of it. But, every child's an artist, and the trick is learning how to keep that artistic value as an adult,
Right.
And I think that's so fitting. I heard that the other day and I was like, man, that is just a wonderful quote. And I wish I didn't butcher it as bad as I did, but it's so true. Like everybody, when you meet people and they say, well, I'm not creative, I don't know how you do that. And I'm like, yeah, you totally are creative. You just have lost touch with that creativity.
Yeah.
Everybody's creative. They just need to learn how to access that key.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered your question, dude.
Yeah, no, for sure you did. Yeah, it's funny that it was the first one I wanted to ask because while I was reading your book, I wanted to mark certain sections, and the only Post-it notes I could find had Batman on them, and so now I have your book with all these Batman stickers on it. And first of all, Batman was
Cool.
the ultimate custom builder, right? But it really seemed to speak to this issue of being childlike. So no, that was a great answer. So the second one I wanted to sort of get your thoughts on was this idea of letting go of things. Obviously your story has to do with letting go of, your original career plans, let's say. in the book, you talk about letting go of what you called unattainable visions, and at another point, you get this idea that you're letting go of fear is important. You talked about your admiring your dad's fearlessness when he figured out how to run a printing press because you needed a printing press. And I remember when you wrote about the potter, this idea came through loud and clear that that just letting go of things is sort of how it all starts. Can you tell me some more about what that means? What letting go means to a maker?
I think it's pretty integral, right? It's like that spark, You have to be able to let go of these, predeterminations and these sometimes these values that you believe in and you think that are so strong and so important. You're blinded by it, And I think you have to at times think about the reality and the openness of, what if, like it's okay, and I think for Craftsman and for craftsmanship, when you're working with hands, you always want perfection and you always want to chase perfection and try to make it as symmetrical as possible and as flawless as possible. And that's really like this false, identity, really, it's like, the sense of perfection is an illusion in your head that is sort of an endless chase. It's like a dog chasing his tail type of thing. You're not going to obtain it. You're going to obtain, and you have to be willing to obtain this level of comfort, this level of acceptance. Like that's where it is.
Yeah.
And that is what your level of perfection is.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep, that makes sense to me. And it actually is a great bridge to the third theme I wanted to ask you about. Now, this is super nerdy, so I'll apologize in advance if it if it catches you a bit flat-footed. But the third theme that seemed to run through this thing was Japan. So early on in the book, you talk about wabi-sabi, which is this philosophical idea that nothing is permanent and nothing is perfect and nothing is finished. And you mentioned, which seemed really appropriate, and you mentioned Zen more than once. And you talk about what is essentially the beginner mind, which is a Zen concept. And so I wonder if you feel drawn to that culture. Would I find this somehow in your work? I mean, or if I made too much of a leap?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. It was a, I don't know, sort of like a never answered riddle type thing, like when is it done? When is something complete? And even when I teach, I ask, the students, I say, when are you done with it? And they say, well, I don't know. You tell me. And I say, well, that's not something I can answer for you.
Right.
You're done with it when you feel you're done with it. And for me, it took me a number of years to find that answer in a way, and for me, it was when I'm done learning from something. So when I'm making something or creating something, I'm finished with it when I've gleaned all the information I can from it. And that's how I know when I'm ready to move on to the next phase or the next step of a project is, if I'm making a fuel tank, when have I gotten it to the point where I can't get any more information out of it? It's as smooth as I can make it. It's as symmetrical as I can make it. It's answered all the questions that I have for it. And there's nothing more for me to learn from it, without, it's like that learning curve has flattened, and the amount that you're going to learn from it is better suited on your next project than on this project.
Right.
And that's when you're ready to move on.
Right.
So, is it, a formula for a Zen state? I don't know.
Yeah, you always want to wade into that one carefully because you don't want to sound pretentious, which I have a habit of doing sometimes. But it is a pretty cool concept, and it comes up a lot in biking. I mean, there's a book we're going to talk about in a minute that has that word in the name. Have you been to Japan, or is that something in your plans?
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah, I think my limited understanding of the culture fascinates me, and there, I think, is so much to learn from that culture, and so many of the other cultures around the world. You know, that in today's age, it's hard to slow down and think about it that way and look at things differently. You know, instead of looking at the end result, look at the journey during that. You know, and enjoy that process, and don't be so focused on the end.
Yep. That's pretty wise advice for lots of things, including riding a motorcycle, I think. And so the last theme that kind of kept coming up for me anyway was what I'll call sort of destiny. So I think nearly all the craftspeople that you write about began their journeys with some kind of moment of revelation, if you like. And that's certainly how you described your decision to become a builder. And I think it's how a lot of riders talk about discovering motorcycles. And so I'm kind of wondering, like, I don't know if there's anyone on earth who has met more craftspeople than you have. You know, based on that experience, do you think we always know? Does that, moment of understanding, is it obvious to us? And if I don't have that epiphany, does that mean I'm not meant to make things or whatever it is that I'm questing for? Does that question make sense?
No, I don't. I think that's a complicated question, right? Like, I think everybody has different moments in life when they have an idea to do something, or they have an idea to make something, or whatever it is, or to change their lifestyle. But I think there's a lot of boundaries put in place that are there for a reason, and sometimes, that will stomp out your dreams of doing something else, or making something else, or doing something different, because these ideas that you already have in your head, and these roadblocks, that are there, like, that's not going to work, or that's not how things are done, like, quite frankly, nothing irritates me more than when somebody says you can't do that because that's not how it's done.
Right.
I just find that anytime I run into that answer, which quite frankly, I think I say that phrase a lot too. Anytime I come across that as an answer, it's a pet peeve, it really sits ill with me, Yeah. Like, well, is that really how we're defining everything here, is just based on how things have been done? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
There are some people in this world who hear that as a dare, I think.
If all you want, or all you want to do are things that have already been done and it's established, then why bother? Like, why think about different things? Why, you know what I mean? Like, just get on the bus and follow that driver.
Right.
Like, why bother? Why waste your time? So usually when I hear that, I find a different way, find different people that, are open.
Yeah. Yeah. And you hear that, I don't know, I don't recall whether you've ever interviewed a musician, but you hear that kind of thinking from them a lot in a studio. There's a sort of like, if I don't have permission to break down boundaries, then I need a new band kind of thing. I think it's a big theme in the thing you study, craftsmanship. I'm wondering, so assuming that we're not all meant to be builders, and I'm thinking about myself here, do you think there's still value in picking up a wrench and getting your hands dirty with a bike or with anything else? Is there value in interacting with things with your hands that we can all experience, and will it make our lives better in some way?
I believe there is, yeah. I mean, anytime you can connect with something like that, especially a motorcycle, like if you're able to spend time and connect with that motorcycle and actually visualize it and understand it better, I think you're going to enjoy the whole process better.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I say that, I mean, I think you're going to enjoy ownership of that machine, and riding that machine.
Yeah. I think that's true. It's not an experience I've had yet. I mean, I kind of do basic maintenance, and I think there's probably a lot of riders like that. But I admire the people who take 100% responsibility for their machines, and I do feel like they get something out of this that I'm not. I just wondered, what that grayscale is like between, me and a real craftsman. Is there still some enlightenment there? And I think you're saying there is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, I think everybody has the attributes of craftsmanship. They just don't always exercise those, ideas and those values or comments. And I think whenever you're making something or you're enjoying something or you're involved with something, the more in depth you are with it, the more you'll get out of it on the back end.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an investment, right? The dividends are in proportion to
even if it's just, even if it's just checking your tire pressure, you know what I mean? And understanding that, like, oh, okay, that's where that's at. That's where it's supposed to be. And this is why that's important.
Yeah.
Like, even something as simple as that, I think, has a lot of value to it, And you're taking ownership for it, too. You're not relying on somebody else to do that for you.
Yeah. Yeah, let's call that responsibility, which I think kind of goes with that autonomy thing that we talked about earlier. You don't get to be free if you're not responsible for yourself, so to speak.
Yeah.
Sort of staying with that for a minute, at a couple of points in your book, you quoted Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which, lots of riders own a copy, and most of them have tried to struggle through it. And I would put myself in that category. It takes a while to kind of get in the groove. But the book was a lot about the tension between what that writer called the romantic and the classical, which I think are somewhat misleading labels. He's basically talking about the choice between just trusting the universe versus getting your hands dirty and making it work. If you'll accept that simplification. It seems to me you might have an opinion on that. Is your book or even your life's work in some way a commentary on that idea?
I can see how you draw that line or conclusion. Zen is a book I've read many times and I've listened to it many times. The audio version of it, and every single time I get a different message out of it, or I pick up something different about it. It's a really intriguing book. It's so interesting, and the relationships involved with it, and the struggle between his egos or identities is interesting. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think it goes back to, for me personally, it goes back to that connection that you have, and whether you're going to check the slack on your chain yourself or you're going to have somebody else do it for you.
So I know, that this conversation and your book are kind of about the broader subject of making things. But, as I read it, I couldn't help noticing how much of your, your advice, if I can call it that, also applies to simply being a rider. You talk about being present and, being always in a learning state. And, there's sort of a list of things that you have said about craftsmanship that I think also describe a good motorcyclist. You're a rider. Do you see those parallels? Are riding and making things, metaphorical cousins somehow?
I think so. Sometimes, like for me, when you're creating something, it's about the journey, right? It's not about the end goal. It's about the journey getting there that excites me. And I think for riding, it was the same thing, like riding a bike was never about getting to the destination. It was the journey there that excited me, and I was never a big fan of like, hey, let's plan out this ride and we're going to know every exit and every road and every gas station and every stop we make. Like, I've always been much more of a, why don't we just head in this direction and see where it takes us?
Right.
And be open to the option of, this seems like a pretty cool lake. Why don't we stop here for a minute and take a swim? Or, this seems like a cool bar. Why don't we stop here and get a sandwich or something? Right. And just be open to the enjoyment of that time, and that's a hard that's a whole other bag of worms, if you ask me. Like that idea of being present, and understanding and valuing your mind in the present state. That's like a whole other discussion, and it's difficult. It's challenging for me, man. I'm always worried about the future.
Yeah, I hear that. It's funny that you mention it, because I'm also at a point in my life where I've kind of left a career behind, and I had coffee this morning with somebody else who was in that same sort of pickle, and we both sort of agreed that the hardest thing, it's easy to say be present. The hardest thing in the world when your whole life has been about the past and the future is to be where you are right now. And to me, that's the strongest parallel between being a builder and being a rider, which I think is kind of what you just said.
Yeah, it's, a lot of us, people buy motorcycles for different reasons. Some of us are looking for that Zen moment, as you said earlier, that ability to live now and enjoy the experience, and other people are getting it for different reasons, for, material values or ownership values or whatever you want to say. And there's no right, there's no wrong, it's your life, dude,
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's not a judgment thing. It's you get out of it what you want out of it, man.
Yeah. Yep. It's quite hard to argue with that.
And to me, that's a big part of that book of Zen, is you get out of life what you want out of life. And that's different for everybody. And There's no right, there's no wrong.
Yeah. It reminds me, you quote somewhere in your book, also this idea that you are what you repeatedly do, which seems connected somehow to what you're saying.
Well, yeah, and that hopefully changes.
Yeah.
Like I like to think that I'm personally changing all the time and seeing different things, and even in the same thing over and over again.
Yeah. One of those parallels that struck me had a little bit to do with trust. So by parallels, I mean the parallel between being a craftsperson and being a rider. Way back in the second episode of this podcast, I interviewed a guy named Todd Egan, who was a former pro racer and a stunt rider, and now he's a builder. And we were talking about the art of cornering, and he said at one point, he said, always bet you're going to make it. And this came back to me when you were talking in your book about trusting yourself. And I kind of found myself thinking, okay, this sounds right, but how do you do that? Whether you're about to bend into a turn or whether you're about to bend a piece of steel, how do you make yourself believe?
Oh, that's a tough question, man. You're getting deep in the weeds here.
It won't get much deeper, I promise.
No, that's cool. I don't mind it, man. I dig talking this way, but I don't know. Sometimes you don't. Sometimes it's a leap of faith. But to me, that's still a trust. That's still, whether you're taking a corner at high speed and you're laying that bike down a little bit more than you normally would, and you're trusting your abilities and your skills and your wheels, your tires, or whether you're bending a piece of metal and that trust is coming from different avenues, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't. Sometimes you don't trust yourself. Sometimes you don't trust your abilities. It took me a long time, man. I just taught a class this past weekend, and I shared this with the students that we had here. I said, I was a good, 10 years into metal shaping before I didn't necessarily become afraid when somebody brought something to me, or asked me to make something for them. I was never I think that's too far out of my skill set. I was always I'll figure it out kind of guy, but that didn't come with, confidence at times. You know what I mean? Like sometimes I didn't know exactly what I was going to do or how I was going to do it, and I had to figure it out. And it took me a long time to get comfortable with that, knowing that, it'll work out. I'll figure it out. So to me, that's all trust,
Yeah. That's good. 10 years. That's very comforting. A lot of people have so much ego wrapped up in this stuff. They don't want to make it, confessions like that, but that feels a lot more like my life.
Oh, geez. It all goes back to life is what you put into it. You know what I mean? And what you want out of it. And for me, it was never, I'll be the first to admit, man, I made plenty of mistakes, but I try to learn from them.
Yeah. Talking about that, you wrote at one point that you became your own restoration project. And I wondered, I'm copping to being a little, overthinking things a little bit, but I wondered if somehow that's what we're all doing when we pick up our tools, restoring ourselves somehow, or even when we ride. Does it feel like, is there something universal there, do you think?
I think there's a lot of healing in working with your hands. And I think that comes, it sort of comes with the territory, like whether you're learning something new that you've never done before and you're spending the time learning it, that's to me, a healing force, and a restoration type force, as you put it. Or whether it's something you've done 1,000 times, but you still appreciate the value of what you're doing and you still, get excited about doing that. That to me, that's all healing.
Yeah. One of the people you met in the course of your work on the show, and you write about it in the book a little bit, was a mixed martial arts fighter. And he apparently told you that everybody needs 3 people in their lives, someone to learn from. I thought it would be my cat, actually, that would do this.
No, it's my dog, Buddy. Somebody came here to see me.
Oh, that's awesome. Anyway, so this MMA fighter said that everybody needs 3 people in their lives. They need someone to learn from, someone to teach, and someone to compete with. And I wondered if, so do you sort of practice that? And if so, what builders do you admire out there whose work still turns your head?
Oh, there's so many builders that I admire. I mean, so many people that are just constantly pushing that envelope, and the creativity and the designs involved, and just it's amazing. I mean, there's not only motorcycle builders, but just people. So many people, so talented. And they really push you to be a better craftsman or better at whatever. It's amazing.
Yeah. It just feels like it's made such a huge comeback. The idea of working with your hands and building things is certainly in the motorcycle world. I guess it's been a bit of a rough month in that world. I mean, Arlen Ness, passed away, and Jesse Rook, which was kind of a surprise. It's comforting somehow to know that there are other builders out there who are going to step into those shoes and move the thing forward.
It was really hard to hear about both Arlen and Jesse, because I didn't really know Jesse. I was trying to think after I heard about his passing. I was trying to think if I had ever met him, actually, and I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't remember. But Arlen, I had an opportunity to meet a number of times and talk to, and I told him when I met him, he was always a hero of mine, and somebody that I really looked up to in the industry for many different reasons. Not only his design, but just the way he carried himself. This can be a very funny industry in some ways. It can be a very attitude-driven type industry. Where as a bike builder, you're almost trying to carry this persona of some kind of character, but with Arlen, you never, he was just a straight up dude, man. He was just cool, and it was definitely sad to hear about his passing.
Yeah, that was my impression of him, was that he was a real original and that what you saw was the real thing. But I hear you on this thing about persona. I mean, I have mixed feelings about it because I think these days that's part of what it takes to get noticed. But it does make you look a little harder for the people that are the real thing. Still, it seems like such a lively space right now. I mean, compared to 10 years ago, there's lots going on.
There's a ton going on, and to tell you the truth, man, I don't do rallies anymore. I don't do shows anymore. When I do go to them, I enjoy it. I don't work them. I just hang out and visit old friends and get some riding in and enjoy my time there. And I don't know if that's good or bad, but I do know one thing. I've always sort of been the way I am, and I never really gave a shit about anything else. I do what I like. I dress the way I like. I act the way I like. It's just who I am, And I used to joke because, you'd see pictures of builders and everybody have their arms crossed and this like mean look on their face or whatever, this badass look. And I was always like, that's the typical, photo of a motorcycle guy.
Right. Yep.
But at the end of the day, like, everybody's a big teddy bear normally.
Yeah, that's been my experience too. But yeah, and lots of grinders. There seems to be a lot of grinding involved in this process. I don't know if you've had a chance to watch some of the films about motorcycle builders some of which are wonderful, and some of which are not. But they really work this persona angle and make a lot of drama out of the process. And I think that's a mixed blessing too. I think you're right to kind of go there and see these people in person. Keep it human. So it occurs to me that you could have a few legacies if you wanted to, or you've got a few to choose from. There obviously are the bikes you build in the business of Voodoo choppers. There's the TV show and all the people that you've reached with your message and the people that you've met. And I would suggest there's also probably your own personal story that qualifies as legacy. So I'm curious to know which one of those is sort of the closest to your heart. You used the phrase choosing to share with the future. I'm wondering which of your legacies, if you had to choose, you would choose to share with the future.
I want to be a good dad. I've got a single daughter, and, quite frankly, I love what I do for a living, and I'm honestly amazed that I've gone this long without a real job. And I'm blessed and very grateful for the opportunity to share so many wonderful stories with people through the television show and the book and stuff like that. But I really just want to be a good dad to my daughter, and spend time with her and know her and know that I was a good dad, and that I helped her in life and helped, her be able to make good decisions and make bad decisions, but learn from them,
Yeah, I do. That's a showstopper of an answer. It's like, yep, me too.
That's really what's important to me, man. I mean, the bikes are cool. The TV show's cool. The book is cool. All this stuff is really cool. I love making shit. I just love making stuff. I'll do it all day long. I'd do it for free if I could, but at the end of the day, when I'm long gone, man, I just hope that I'm remembered as a good dad. Really, that's the biggest thing for me.
Yep. Yep, that's right. You wrote in the book that so I'll quote here, the noise of my bike is the purest kind of peace I know. I think a lot of us probably feel that way. I'm wondering what you think as bikes become sort of more perfect and more flawless and more simple to live with. How do we hang on to that sense of connection?
I like the old stuff. And when I say old stuff, I like my favorite Harley motor is a shovelhead engine. Absolute, by far, my favorite. And I love it because, like a true HD shovelhead sounds super mechanical. You hear the angle, you can hear the angle of those push rods, and the valve angle, and you can hear the lifters. I mean, it's such a pretty noise, and it's mechanical, and people that aren't used to it, they'll hear it and the bike is running great, and they'll be like, oh man, what's wrong with your bike? And that's just awesome, and because it's clanky, there's a rawness about it that I really appreciate and love. And it's sort of saddening now because, you don't necessarily hear that anymore. The new bikes are super quiet and you don't feel the vibrations through them. Everybody wants this, everything's super balanced and no vibrations in it, man. I love getting on a bike and, you get off it at the end of the day and your hands are still tingling a little bit because you've just been riding all day, and your butt hurts and your back hurts. And, hell, you feel alive. You know what I mean? Like you've connected with that machine, that machine's reached out and touched you, and it makes you remember, and I like that. And I like that about cars too. I mean, I drive an 18 Ford F-150, which is super luxe, and I'm totally spoiled with it, but I still love jumping in my buddy's, old F-150 and the thing is clanky and loud and the doors slam and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's heavy steering, you know what I mean? And I love that.
Yeah.
That connection.
I was talking to a guy recently who has a 49 Panhead. He's a musician, and he could have read exactly the same script that you just did, and he lights up the same way you just lit up. I'm not a Harley guy, but the one thing that makes me wonder is when I hear guys talk about the old ones. I mean, from what I understand, you have to love a Panhead, but still, like there's something about what you just said that I find quite appealing. And it's a pretty good answer to the question how you hang on, because I've got motorcycles that sound like sewing machines, and they're great tools, but they don't leave you tingling in any way at the end of the day. That's a good answer.
Well, it's a different experience for you though, man. You know what I mean? Like I said earlier, man, my way isn't the right way. It's my way. It's right for me. But what you get out of it is totally different than what I get out of it or want out of it. I think BMW, I don't know what you ride, but, like a BMW, man, that is an awesome machine. Awesome machine. And the ones I've ridden have been a joy to ride, but it's a different kind of joy.
Yep.
And what I get out of that is totally different than what I necessarily like in motorcycling. It's just a different connection, and that's totally fine. It's totally cool. It's different for everybody.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's the laziness of fuel injection and all that stuff that makes your life simple. But I do like a little noise.
Yeah, see, I hate fuel injection. Like, I don't like it at all. I see a purpose for it. I think it's great on my car, on my truck. Yeah. I think it's awesome, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, the fact that I could jump in my truck or press a button and the thing starts is awesome, and the heat seaters and all that stuff, or the seat heaters, all that stuff is great. Like, I'm totally spoiled, but on a motorcycle, like, I want that connection. I want to hear that fuel, I want to hear that mixture and feel that force behind it. And I like the fact, I love Springer front ends. Yep. People complain about them all the time, especially in Michigan. The roads are horrible in Michigan. They're like, oh my God, it is Springer, it beats you up. And I'm like, yeah, it's awesome. Like, you feel it. You can see it moving, you see the springs working, my, one of my thumbs is just trashed because I was taking a Springer apart maybe a month ago, and the clamp that I had on it let loose, and that, man, one of those springs just came out and ricocheted off my thumb, man, and just totally trashed my thumb. But like, I love all that about it. Yeah.
I think I got a lot of listeners probably standing up clapping right now, so I know you're not alone.
Man, that's a great thing about motorcycles in general. Even more so than a car. It's so personal. So personal that decision you make and what you ride and how you ride it is very personal. And it sort of sucks because I don't get to ride nearly as much as I used to.
Well, you should fix that. It sounds like you love it.
I really enjoy it a lot, but it's just one of those things, man. It's like, being a small business owner, even a bike builder. There's been many times where I didn't have a personal bike because I had to sell it to keep my business going.
Yeah.
And that's just life, man. You make a choice. I've always enjoyed building them more than I have riding them. So if I had to make a choice between the two, I'd stick with building them.
Yeah, that's that self-awareness thing. So there's a lot in what you've shared in your book and on your show that I think anybody can learn from. But I feel like I have to ask, as we kind of wind this up, what do you hope a fellow motorcyclist is going to take away from reading this? I mean, there really are only a few pages dedicated to bikes in particular. The rest are all about these larger themes. But if a few people who listen to this podcast decide to go out and buy the book and read it, what do you hope they're going to take home?
I think whether you're a biker or a chef or, a caregiver or whatever you do for a living, man, I think there's a lot of good values in life that you can get from that book that, they're not my ideas. It's just life, and there's a lot of values in craftsmanship that I think apply to everybody in life, no matter what you do for a living or how you live your life, and for me, one of the biggest turning points in my life for me was slowing down and enjoying whatever I'm doing. And that's so important and something that's so easy to give up and not think about it. One of the stories I shared in the book was making pancakes, and I've used it in lectures. I've given lectures before and about this. That simple process of making pancakes is something that can really be easily forgotten, and something that we really don't take time and slow down and enjoy the process and really try to, make something better this time than we did last time, and the story itself is sort of funny, but it's a little long-winded, so I'll leave that for people that want to buy the book. But, I think there's a lot of things in life that you can get from the book and a lot of life lessons or principles that maybe you can apply.
Yeah.
And maybe it'll, inspire you to work with your hands a little bit or learn something new.
Are you working on anything interesting right now at Voodoo?
Oh, always. Yeah, we've got a couple different builds that are in different stages right now. We've got a couple that are getting wrapped up here for spring that's right around the corner, which is good. I'm working on a sculpture installation right now that is being installed in June for a city. So that's sort of, I've been working on that quite a bit lately. And then I started getting back into woodworking over the last couple of years. So I just recently started building a wood shop. And that's been awesome because I've been working on metal during the day and then working at the wood shop at night.
Oh, that's cool.
And that's awesome because I'm learning all these new things, all these new skills and things that, have long been forgotten, but I really enjoy it.
Yep. It's easy to tell. And I got to say, Eric, I have really enjoyed speaking with you. I can't thank you enough for your time.
Me too. Thank you.
Oh, you're more than welcome. I can't thank you enough for your time, but also for sharing what I think is a pretty inspiring story. I've seen motorcycles open some doors for people, but you've really taken it to another level. And it's just been awesome to get to know you. Good luck with the Craftsman's legacy.
Thank you so much, man. Thank you so much. I definitely live a blessed life, man.
As do we all. Well, take care out there.
You too.
Thanks. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
I think when people look at a motorcyclist, they don't have any trouble believing that it takes courage to do this. But what might surprise them is that the courage it takes to be a rider isn't always about going fast or being vulnerable to traffic or the elements. Often, it's about being a student again. Especially if you came to writing or returned to it as a mature adult, you probably remember quite clearly the mixture of terror and elation that came with realizing that you didn't know anything. And later, the realization that if you were going to have a long, happy life as a writer, it would mean being an apprentice forever. That's the part of Eric's story that I really connected with. At first glance, Eric Gorges looks and sounds exactly like a guy who builds choppers, with all the plain-spoken self-confidence of someone who's been doing it for 20 years. And yet, here's someone who in the prime of his life gave up a career as an expert to become an apprentice. Someone who hosts a television show in which he has to learn a new craft with every episode. Someone who has described his life as a restoration project. I wonder how many of us ride motorcycles for exactly the same reason, and if maybe that's what we really have in common with the people who build them. After Eric and I spoke, I was reminded of a wonderful quote that I'd read on an internet forum a while back. The writer, a motorcyclist with apparently decades of experience, said, "I've never encountered anything that can transport you so easily from where you are to who you are. Likely why so many of us hold tight to it long past the point of reason." Well, maybe that's what obsessions like this are really about. And maybe we're all building something when we have a motorcycle in our lives, even if we never pick up a wrench. And if we're lucky, I guess, we'll never be finished. Well, thanks for listening. You'll find show notes for this episode at thismotorcyclelife.com. That's also how you can reach me if you have questions, comments, or suggestions. Emailing me at thismotorcyclelife@gmail.com works too, and every email gets an answer. You can also follow me on Instagram, where I like to post pictures of bikes I find on the street. I've been a bit lazy about that lately, but I promise to do better. And where you can follow a lot of the people I've interviewed for this podcast, including Eric Gorges. This episode's playlist recommendation is one of those happy accidents, this time from stumbling onto an article in Rolling Stone. The artist is Tyler Childers. A phenomenal storyteller, Childers calls Eastern Kentucky his home, and he lives the kind of hands-on life that I think Eric Gorges might appreciate. The track is called Detroit, and it's kind of about what happens when you bet your life on work you were never meant to do. You can buy it wherever you like to get your music, and in the meantime, keep staying alive out there. 1, 2, 3.
Riding in Route 23, it's hard to believe we made it this far. So come on, boys, and grab your coats. Detroit's waiting, get in the car. Blows cold, but the girls are on fire. They say they're the prettiest things you have seen. And I ain't a gambler, but I'd bet the farm that Detroit's a gold mine waiting for me.